Hey, welcome back to the Christian Music Industry Podcast. I'm your host and friend in the Christian music industry, Wisdom Moon, and I'm really excited to have my friend Sam Hart today with me. Welcome, Sam.
Hey, Wisdom, thanks so much for having me, man. It's always a blast and great to be back
Yeah,
with you, dude. Love hanging.
thanks for taking the time. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, Sam is located in Franklin, Tennessee, or many people would still call it Nashville. Especially if you've never been to Nashville, it's all Nashville.
So
So,
true.
he is married to his high school sweetheart, Christin, and they have three amazing kids, according to Sam. I don't know. I haven't seen it for myself. uh, he's a full-time Christian and worship music producer and songwriter. And over the last 2 decades, he's been involved in the Christian music industry in various ways, including as a touring musician, signed artist, and worship pastor. So I'm really excited to dive into some of that with you today. I would love to hear how you first started into this industry called the Christian music industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I know you're aware of this, but you totally win for like coolest, most sagey name ever. I've always thought, like, I've always been like kind of jealous of how well branded you are as a human being.
Man, I get asked so many times, is that your real name? Literally at church on Sunday, somebody asked me that because they were like a new visitor and they wanted to get involved with the worship team. And they're like, is that really your real name? I'm like, yeah, I can show you my driver's license.
That's amazing,
Yeah. God has a
dude.
plan, I guess.
I, dude, 100%, you can tell. Um, wow. Well, to answer your question of how I got started, I mean, I went to my first concert at age 7. It was a Christian concert. I'd be shocked if most of your listeners can remember who this is, but it was Dallas Holm, and it was
Oh, yeah.
yeah, he was the first Christian artist to have an album certified gold in
Oh,
1970
wow.
something, 76, 77.
Man.
But he had this little stint where he had a group or like a band with a
Mm,
couple other guys, and one of them was a guy named Phil Johnson, who was a
mm,
producer. He produced most of Dallas's records and other people like the Imperials and things like that.
yeah.
Um, and that was them that night. So we went to that concert, and that was the night I knew what I wanted to do with my life.
Oh,
I
wow.
remember it so clearly. I remember the feeling. I remember the sound. I
Mm.
remember how it sounded. And it's funny if people go back and listen now, they would think like, man, that is so like not for me. That's like, some people would just think it sounds so dated. But what's funny is, um, that aside, what
Mm,
I thought was super cool was like here was especially Dallas as kind of the front man, so to speak,
mm,
had this like radical experience with God, just kind of not really a Christian household or whatever, but was in a band and was just kind of doing the thing, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and have this experience with God, and it changed his life. But what was interesting about that era is there wasn't an industry for Christians, really. I mean,
mm.
there was, you could get on a circuit with like a big world class speaker or something like that, maybe like
Yeah.
Billy Graham, or I know that there was sometimes, Zondervan, like book
Mm,
publishers sometimes had like a music wing you can kind of partner with, but it was very few and far between. And so his thought process and many others like him were what was something like, well, I'm in music, I make music, and now my life is sold out to Jesus. So I guess I'm just going to make music about Jesus.
mm.
I'm going to share Jesus with
Yeah.
people. And it wasn't really split up into the subgenre of
Yeah.
Christian music. It was just good music, but they shared about their life, which is Jesus. And so that is what kind of was impressed upon me, and I thought,
Mm,
this is what I want to do with my life. I want to talk about God. I want to talk about the things of the kingdom. I want to wrestle through music, and I want to write songs. So I started writing songs at a very young age. made an album at 13. That's a whole other crazy story. I so honor my parents because I have no idea how they got me into this dope studio that was run by like a guy who had worked at RCA. It was a huge
Oh,
studio in
wow.
Southern California. I have no idea how I did it, but they somehow wheeled and dealed, and I did a 10-song album at age
Oh,
13,
wow.
and then I did another one at 15, and that's where I started just soaking up the studio life. I
Mm,
loved everything about not just writing songs, but then the actual the smell of tubes and circuitry and
mm,
microphones and that just musty old, studio smell. I became addicted to it
mm,
at that point. And um, honestly, the art and science of overdubbing, of like multi-track recording,
mm,
and so yeah, man. But here's the interesting thing: my parents moved to another part of Southern California. I'm from San Diego, and so we started going to this church, and some guys from a band. It was one of the early Christian hip hop groups called
mm.
Sackcloth Fashion.
Oh,
They
yeah.
all went to our church, and so I started getting involved with the worship team, whatever. And they were just like, "Man, this guy is a psycho and plays music. Like, we should invite him." So they invited me to join their basically the whole tour, like the summer touring seasons.
Mm,
And that was the year I was graduating high school, which was awesome. So I graduated high school and jumped into rehearsals. And then
wow.
our first show was with Audio Adrenaline and Super Chick, like
Oh, wow.
opening for them. And it was like, I was like thrust into that, So I did
Man.
a few years of just pretty regular touring and that stuff. And
And what was your role in sackcloth?
yeah, so in Sackcloth, I was like the everything guy, the guitars, keys, background vocals, hype guy. So jumping off amps, and
Wow.
at that point, I was just the kind of guy that would cut tiger stripes in my beard and make my own clothes out of thrift store junk. And anyways, it was super super fun, super enjoyed it. And then long story short, I did a semester of music theory. Music industry actually was
Mm,
the thing in school, and then I quit to get married. So got married and then got a full-time job as a worship leader that next year, and did that for 15 years.
wow. Man. I grew up listening to Christian hip hop, now known as like CHH. So
Yeah.
there's very few Christian hip hop artists or groups that I've never heard of, back in the day. Because
Really?
yeah, oh yeah, I spent like hours at the Christian, like local Christian bookstore, and I would just like listen to all the new music. They would have like the cassette tape players at the bookstore. You could listen to the demo. And then
Absolutely. I spent
yeah, and
many
then there
hours
was
doing
like
that.
CDs, yeah, and then you could put on the headphones and listen to all these like different demos, and then pick out the one you want to buy. So yeah, sackcloth. I've definitely yeah grew up listening to.
Oh
Um,
man.
yeah,
Dude,
so yeah, when you
crazy.
first told me that you were part of the group, I was like, "What?" It was so wild, like
Totally
I
random, huh?
never thought. So yeah, that's super cool. So now, fast forward, you're in Nashville, and you're doing this thing. You write a bit and produce. You work with a lot of different artists. So, how did you like? When and how like did you transition to like now doing this? In Nashville full time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different angles I could take on that, but I would say, just to keep it quick, in '09 I came out for another GMA,
Oh
and
yeah.
it was when they were still at the Renaissance Hotel. Big,
Mm,
people all over the world came, and artists hung out, but it was also a great place for up and coming, like, singer songwriters or whatever, to just
mm,
get, build relationships. And so, just in case any of your listeners don't remember GMA, that's kind of what it was. And so I came, and somehow I crossed path. Um, Man, this is, I feel a little emotional about this because she's a legend, but ran into this gal named Cindy Wilt Colville.
oh
And
yeah.
she's just kind of a champion of songwriters. She's signed so many of the top artists that your
Mm,
listeners know and love. And I somehow, I think it was even just sitting in the lobby, and it wasn't even about music. We were just talking.
mm,
And anyways, I had this little 10-song thing that I'd made in a bedroom, and for $0, on an inbox or something at the time, and shared it with her. And she got back to me. She called me back while we were still at GMA, and she said, "I would love to just work with you, and I love this stuff." She's like, "I can tell it costs nothing and it sounds awful, but the songs are good." And so she's she introduced me to some folks, and then we stayed in touch. And what's
Mm,
interesting is I look back and I don't know if I would have kept writing songs, or even if I would have kept producing, if she didn't believe in me.
mm.
And she was so encouraging. And I had this one song in particular that she really loved, and she tried to get it cut. In fact, I think she did, but I don't know if it ever landed on an album.
Oh.
Um, and uh, and and so I was encouraged by that, and just kept kind of, even though worship leading at local churches kind of grew to become like a career path for me. And then I ended up going to like a multi-site mega church, after a few years, and became a worship director and got to hire a staff, and we started a record label.
Mm,
And we got some press, and just had a lot of fun. On the worship leading side, on local church side, there was just something in my heart that continued to just imagine, um, working with some of the most impactful Christian music makers on the planet,
mm.
making the next generation of Christian music.
Yeah.
And so I kept writing a lot. And at some point, when we had moved to this big church up in Central California, um, I just that was the one I was telling you about, where we made the record label kind of format for
Mm,
disciple making. So all it was, in Ephesians, it talks about, that our job as leaders is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry.
mm.
And so we thought, well, then why are the professionals doing all the work? Why are we getting all the
Yeah.
stage time? So this was our way of saying, let's create a pipeline where we put volunteer musicians through like a development course
Mm,
on what is a worship leader, even some skill stuff like musicianship and worship
yeah.
leading skills. But then after that, they are put into a group of people that they kind of naturally gravitate towards, and they become the worship leadership at those campuses. And and then from there we produced, and so I started producing almost full time just in that role.
Oh, wow.
um, we worked with, we had 11 bands rotating through the campuses, and we were
Wow.
making music with all of them all the time.
Mm,
And that's where I started having people around me say, you should do that. Like this
mm.
thing you're doing where you're developing these musicians and artists and producing their sounds with them and writing their arrangements,
Yeah.
because we did the same 40 songs. That's kind of the way we did it, was everyone did their own version of the same 40 songs,
Mm,
so that the church had a shared kind of, um, shared songbook, so to speak.
yeah.
But there was all these expressions of those same songs. And so,
Mm,
it was a really creative season, a really creative environment. And so but I started feeling the same way. Like, as much as I love being a worship pastor, as much as I love leading worship,
mm,
there's just something about that context of creating in the studio and writing that I come alive. And so
mm,
as people started affirming that, my wife and I started praying about that. Like, God, what is this thing? Like, can't ignore it.
mm,
We've tried. So that was about 2016 or so. We moved back down to San Diego. I started, working with a guy there named Mark Suhonen, who took me under his wing, and I started ghost producing for him. And
mm.
he is a guy that works with the Jason Ingrams and the Jonathan Smiths and those kind of guys to produce with them. And so he started pulling me in on some of that stuff. And
And for people that may not know what you mean by it, what do you mean by ghost producing?
so a ghost producer is someone who does producing for a producer so that he can help share the load, kind of like what a
But you don't
ghost
get
writer
credit
does.
for it.
Usually not.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I mean, it just depends. So you're like a subcontractor, basically.
Mm,
The beautiful thing about Mark, though, is I really look to him as someone who, um, really helped me go from a guy who could do it to a guy who, can work fast, efficiently at a high level,
mm,
because he was so good at just like, hey, it's not good enough yet, and send it back and make me redo stuff.
yeah.
And so he taught me a lot of what, his kind of
Mm.
method for things was.
Yeah.
It being in hip hop really influenced me. I mean, I
Mm.
learned so much from those years hanging out with the guys from Sackcloth Fashion because, well, Tim, it was kind of, it started as two brothers, and Tim
Mm.
was more of the producer of the two, and he was a producer for all kinds of things outside of the band. I mean, he
Mm.
produced for the Daredevil soundtrack, and he produced on all kinds of
Oh.
other projects, and actually influenced the future of Christian hip hop. I mean,
Mm.
guys like Propaganda, guys like Braille,
Yeah.
Beautiful Eulogy, those kind of groups came out of Syntax and came out of Tim's
Mm.
kind of mentorship.
Yeah.
And Tim, he lives here in Franklin now, and runs a big distribution label. But so we still interact quite a bit.
Mm.
But anyways, that really influenced me. But Mark helped me hone in. Here's how you program drums in a way that sounds more natural. It doesn't
Mm.
sound programmed. Here's how you tune vocals well. Here's how you pocket the vocals,
Mm.
um, and his attention to detail blew my mind. So I'm really grateful for that. But long story short, that was kind of the beginning of a whole new era of starting to be sensitive to what would this look like if I wasn't in worship anymore? What
Yeah.
if this was something we started moving towards? And so there's a whole other aspect of the story,
Wow.
of how Franklin, Tennessee kind of started coming up, you know.
Yeah. And you and your wife have put out some music together as well. Is that something that you're like wanting to continue to do, or is that like, you know, once in a while when you feel like it, you'll do something?
More of that, what's funny is as songwriters here, and that working with songwriters all the time, that you can write, hundreds of songs a year. You can be in a
Yeah.
room writing pretty much every day or every other day. And I know I've talked to a lot of songwriters here that feel this way. Sometimes you're just like, man, there's so many good songs, and you
Mm.
hand them off to a publisher or you put them in a
Mm.
file, and for whatever reason, they may or may not ever see the light of day. Like,
Yeah.
and but yet there's some good ones out there. So I think some of it has been she and I sometimes just attach ourselves to a song
Mm.
that if sometimes we feel like it's not going to be used by anyone, it's just like, hey, we'll do it for fun.
Yeah.
But really, Kristen and I met and we started writing together, when we were like our daughter's age, which is crazy.
Mm.
I have a 15-year-old daughter. That's about the time Kristen and I met, was when we were about 15, 16. And we started writing together. And then once we got married, we didn't do any music together for
Mm.
all those years. So quite a few years ago, we just started kind of going back to it and just being like, man, how fun would it be to write something and share it? So at that time, we had
Mm.
gone through a lot of therapy and counseling. We had gone through some rough seasons of marriage, to
Mm.
be transparent. And through that, we just came to a place of some growth. Kristen, especially, she would tell you she has a story of childhood trauma, childhood abuse,
Yeah.
and so we started making music together, working on a song called "Never Alone."
Mm.
And and so if you went to Spotify and looked up Sam and Kristen Hart, you would find that song "Never Alone," and it really came from that story of childhood trauma. And we just
Oh.
started making songs that we could, at the time when we were in full-time ministry, share with folks. Just be
Mm.
like, man, here's our story, and if this can help you, great. So we've had people from all over the world tell us, like, your song, God so used it in my life. And that's
That's
it.
awesome.
To me, that's success. To
Yeah.
have one person have their life impacted by something that
Yeah.
you are a part of writing or producing,
Mm.
um, that those are my favorite
Mm.
messages. And so artists now that I've worked with, they know that, and they'll send me texts or messages when they get them from their
Yeah.
fans, and those make my day, man. There's nothing
Yeah.
like it.
Mm. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So you guys are independent, and you work with a lot of independent and signed artists, and really are the whole music industry has really changed over the years, and the Christian music industry also has changed a lot. And there's been this like traditional, label model that I feel like is kind of obsolete, and it's not as effective anymore. It's not really a
Mm,
win-win for the artist. in most cases. I think some artists is still a good fit. So I'm not saying like as a blanket statement, like all the
Sure.
traditional deals are horrible. But I think there's a lot of debate out there about that. But I do think there's creative ways now that independent artists can continue to put out music and do music even on a full time level without giving up ownership and creative controls to a label, and be independent. So I'm curious, like, having worked with so many artists as a producer, co-writer, I know you do some consulting as well. What are some ways that you've seen, independent artists be able to do this successfully and like with longevity, and not feel like they're isolated and not feel like they don't have the support around them that they need to be successful in it?
Hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I was just talking to my bro Seth Mosley, which,
Yeah.
by the way, we were doing an interview for a new podcast that I'm going to be
Oh, yeah.
launching soon, called the Eternal Music Podcast, which we could talk about later if you
Awesome.
want. But
Yeah.
anyways, Seth and I were talking about this on his episode, um, and it's just this whole idea that there are still a lot of artists out there, which I totally understand. It's easy to see how this is still a thing, but so many artists are out there thinking there's a big old label that needs people like me,
Mm,
and so if I just get in front of the right person, they're gonna pluck me out of obscurity and create a
mm,
platform for me. And
yeah.
what a lot of artists, especially artists that I consult with, and sometimes indie artists that I'm producing that are just starting out, I get to come alongside them and help them realize, like, actually, that's not at all how it happens anymore, almost ever.
Mhm,
And really, what you should be doing is just pretending there's no such thing as a record label. You
mm,
have to be the CEO of your own company. You
yeah.
have to think entrepreneurial. You have to think, if this was a little business, a mom and pop business, how do I make it super scrappy? And
Mm,
how do I make it so that I can get it in front of the people that need it, that want it, the right
mhm,
audience? And so what's funny is this is actually something I'm sure you and I could talk about forever
mm,
and just geek out. But one of my favorite kind of marketing gurus, Seth Godin, he
oh,
talks
yeah.
a lot about just the idea of tribes and a lot
Mm,
about what marketing actually is, which everything is marketing. And that's
mm,
something that I think a lot of artists, especially just being really music minded and experiential, don't realize that marketing isn't just like Mad Men. It's not ads. It's not this like little small department of
mm,
companies. It's like the way that people perceive their need for the thing that you have. It's like
yeah.
the way that people understand you and your story and everything about you and their place in the story and all of that
Mm,
stuff. And so um zooming out and kind of doing the work of like, hey, let's get out of like fantasy land, and you're not instead of trying to be this other artist or be like this other artist, figure out what you're passionate about, what you would talk about, and what you would do for free, and do a lot of that. And
mm,
then find the people that care about that thing and offer it to them. And you will be the person that is the go to top of mind person for that thing. And so, yeah, man, I think that's where it starts. I don't know if that
mm,
completely answers your question, but I think that artists need to get in touch with that, and in a good way, it might actually scare off a lot of people that
mm,
shouldn't be doing music, that it
yeah.
should be more of a hobby, or it should be uh just, I don't know what, but some people, they if they knew that's really what it was that it was like an entrepreneurial venture, like an
Mm,
endeavor, they might not get into it because all they want to do is just be the artist on the stage. And
yeah.
honestly, I don't know how someone does that unless maybe you're getting hired by a casino to do
Mm,
covers, or you find just some unique way for people to pay you to just be you,
yeah.
and you can just do that without having to think about the rest of it. But
Mm,
you did say
oh,
something a minute ago that I think is important. I would love to hear your thoughts on it sometime too, and that is just the whole concept of how to build the right team.
mm,
I do think that is a conversation more and more artists are starting to have now. Um,
Yeah.
is how to do that on a small indie scale. Um,
Yeah. Man, I obviously talk to a lot of independent artists every week, and I talk to actually I recently talked to an independent artist that has some traction on their own, and
mhm.
I do think there's a time where, as an artist, that when you're independent. So I think there's kind of like, I guess the way I think about it is there's three types of artists. I need to like write a blog post about this or something. One
Yeah,
is the
a book.
hobbyist, right? Like
Mhm.
an artist who just loves music and they want to put out a fun like passion project. They're not trying to quit their day job, they just want to do it as a fun hobby once in a while. So that's the hobbyist. They're not worried about making money from it. They're totally happy if just their family and friends hear it. Like they're not super serious about marketing themselves. They may not even really exist on social media. I think that type of artist, they don't really need a team. They just need DistroKid, and they need a producer, and then they're on
Right.
their way. I think there's a second type of artist that's more of like the part-time artist. Um, I guess it's kind of like in a business sense, like a startup. You're starting this thing. Right now, you're not really making much from it. Maybe you're a full time worship pastor, or like you have a full time day job, but your goal is to become full time with music. Um, I talked to a lot of these kind of artists, and even yesterday, I talked to an artist like this, and really like trying to communicate expectations as far as like, hey, this is how long it takes if you do see traction. I heard an A&R person in the UK for like a major label say that, I think he said there's like, from all the artists that he's worked with, it takes about 26 releases until an artist breaks. And if you released a single a month, that's over 2 years. And I think most artists have a hard time going like, it's going to take me 2 years to like break as an artist. And then the a lot fewer, the smaller percentage would be like the full-time artists, the artists that are able to sustain it full time. And maybe they do some part-time stuff here and there, like producing other people or whatever. So I would say, for people that are part-time trying to be full-time, and then of course with the full-time artist, like you really need a team, even if you don't sign with a label, like you can build your own
Mm,
team, right? So yeah, like what
yeah.
you're saying, like you have to put the business owner hat and go, okay, I'm building a business, and in the business there's different departments, different roles. And I actually heard this person talk about a manager's role, how like basically you as an artist, you're the company, like you're the brand and the company, and your manager is the CEO. And so the CEO helps build out your team, and like hire different people and stuff.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel like we could talk about this for like hours, but yeah, I
That's a
think
good one, man. I like that one.
yeah, I think a lot of times artists don't really think of and realize the fact that like you can't do this by yourself. Like you have to have a team, no matter like how you build it, whether it's a label, whether it's like you hire, a marketing agency, you hire a publicist, you hire a manager, like you can't wear all those hats. Like that's just not possible, as a
Yeah.
like a solo artist, or even for a band. Like it's really difficult to have the right members with the right expertise
Mm,
that can really help you like take things to the next level. So yeah, I think when you're working with independent artists, and in this like world right now that we live in, there's so much opportunity for indie artists. And you mentioned
mm.
Seth Godin, like he quotes another author that talks about, you've heard of the like 1,000 true fans.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something I share a lot with artists, and they're like, "Whoa, I never thought about that." Like think about if you had 1,000 fans, like our agency, we call them passionate fans, but some
Mm-hmm.
people call it super fans, true fans. But if you had 1,000 people that are willing to pay $100 a year for you to do whatever, like maybe it's merch, ticket sales, or whatever. I mean, think about the revenue side. Obviously, there's expenses, but that's $100,000. That's
Mm-hmm.
more than most artists listening to this currently are making, from music. So, but if you think about it, like 100 or 1,000 people aren't that many people, and $100 a year isn't that much money, you know.
That's right.
So
I
yeah, it's
love
all
that
about
quote,
like
man.
building that community like that really are loyal to you and they're really excited about what you're doing. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
love for you to like talk about your approach when you're consulting an artist, producing an artist, because I know like your heart is to really help the artist win. And I think you just posted something maybe on Instagram about like the artists that tend to be the right fit for you are basically like kingdom minded artists, and have the same perspective and vision on it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what's kind of like your approach when you're talking to an artist and maybe like discussing like working together?
Like from a producer side?
Yeah, as a producer, and maybe even like when you're consulting artists, what are some of the things that you're looking for?
Yeah. Wow. Well, some of what you're referring to, it's a part of a deep place in my heart where a couple of things kind of significant happened about 7 years ago for me.
Mm,
One of them was I went through a pretty significant burnout in ministry.
mm,
And part of that was something that a lot of people are talking about now, and that is a deconstruction of their faith. And I
mm,
went through this kind of dark season, and some people have heard it called the dark night of the soul.
mm,
And and part of that was I felt like I was losing my faith. And so I had a
yeah,
mentor in my life that was wise enough to tell me like don't be scared, don't be afraid to ask any question.
mm,
um God, if he's real, is big enough on the other side of this to be there and to catch
yeah,
you and to pull you through. And so what was hard for me was that I was in the middle of full-time ministry at the time, and and had a staff and just a lot of responsibilities.
mm,
And so it was a cautious season for me going through that, but I was willing to go wherever the questions led. And even if that led to agnosticism or atheism, I was ready to do that, which was a sort
mm,
of disorienting and scary feeling at the time.
yeah,
Um, and so I dabbled in whatever I could learn from every side of that conversation. And what ended up happening is through the burnout, it gave me some space and it gave me some rest to wrestle through these things. And
mm,
because I took some time off ministry, and um, but then I also came to the other end of it more kind of, I would say, more passionate, more diehard in my faith
mm,
than ever in my life when I did come back to God. Because there was a point where I just decided, I'm like, this is the only thing that makes sense to me. There's a lot of questions, and it's not perfect. It's not,
yeah,
it's not cute and pretty and tidy, but
mm,
it makes more sense than the other things that I dove into,
mm,
the other alternatives. Um, and so that was one big thing for me that kind of bound my heart to the God of the Bible, the creator of the
mm,
universe, as revealed in scripture. And the other thing that happened is, being from California, when I first started the production company, one of the things that I started doing was thinking what a lot of folks think when starting a business or even as an artist, in lots of contexts, is how can I, when you're trying to think, how do I make money? You think, how can I get my message in front of the most amount of people?
mm,
So you think this shotgun approach.
yeah,
And that was the approach I took. I'm just going to be a good producer. I'm just going to make
mm,
music and do as much as I can. I have experience in all these genres. I've been in
yeah,
hip hop and rock and worship and whatever, country. And what I quickly found, and this is funny because this wasn't even a strategy for me, but
Mm.
what I quickly found was I had this moment early in the business where I was working on all these things, and I felt I was in this time of, I wasn't even a prayer or anything like that. It was just I was alone in the studio, and I felt like in my heart, like God was just gently saying, Sam, I have been crafting you since you were a young child to make Christian music. Like, you know how to do it. You know that the way the artists think, you
Mm.
know the point and the mission of it. And even in a commercial context, you know this how to make the sound, like you know the
Yeah.
sound of it and all these things. And so I felt like God was saying, why are you running from it? Why are you trying to do all these other things? And what I realized is, especially on the West Coast, there isn't really a Christian music culture there.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, pop and rock, and then there's like church music, there's worship, but that's like this whole other like crazy genre with its own
Yeah.
function and context. But there isn't really this like Christian music thing. Yeah, back in the day there was Spirit West Coast and some of those sorts of
Mm.
festivals, and they would pull Christian music listeners out of the woodwork. But
Yeah.
in general, it's not really a thing. A lot of artists that I knew that were Christians were not trying to be Christian artists.
Mm.
And so there was this element of shame. Like, I felt ashamed of
Mm.
Christian music. And so God was calling me out, and I felt like God was saying, I've been crafting you since you were a young child to make Christian music. Why are you ashamed of it? Like, if you don't like
Mm.
something, be the change. Be the change you want to see, not to sound
Yeah.
cliche, but that's exactly what I felt like God was saying to me. So I made a decision at that point as, and I had no idea how this was going to go. I literally expected it to be, uh, no one's going to want anything to do with me and I'll never make a sale.
Mm.
But I started just saying on my website and when I talk to people, I'm a Christian music producer.
Mm.
Oh, you want to make, a mainstream rap song? Love it, but I don't do that. Here's another person that does it. Or I just
Yeah.
started kind of like letting people know this is what I do.
Mm.
And it makes sense where actually what that did was niche me into a,
Mm.
like, oh, Sam's the Christian music guy for indie music, people. Um, but also what it's helped me to do is find my tribe. What Christin and I started doing when we started the producing company was we started praying, God, bring the people that are the right fit for us to us and make us the right fit for those people. Like, bring us together. The
Yeah.
artists that we're supposed to serve, bring them to us. And God started doing that. And so to answer your question, kind of the long way to it is just like when I'm consulting with people, I try to work with Christian music artists, or I should put it this way, Christians who make music, not
Mm.
necessarily people that want to make songs that belong on K-Love or something. What I
Yeah.
mean is Christians who make music, whatever that is. And whether I'm producing them or working with them, you know, as a coach, um, it all goes back to a little bit of what you were saying before, and that is figure out what you're passionate about and let's find that community that
Yeah.
wants you. And the more authentic you are to your heart, the more
Mm.
authentic you are to what you're passionate about, I think that you will stand out and be something unique with something to say and something to offer, something that meets a need that people have.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that's kind of how that story came about for me, of
Mm.
just ending up, some people have kind of raised their eyebrows when I say Christian music producer, because I think a lot of people are trying to generalize, but I'm like
Yeah.
actually trying to dive in. And to me, it's not about, you know, Christian music in terms of radio or whatever, even though I do dabble in that side of things as well. But it's really just that I have a heart for people that are all in with God
Mm.
and that are kingdom minded and see their music as a way to actually impact the world.
Yeah.
Those are the people that I connect with well, and I'm
Mm.
that way. And so I think that
Yeah.
that's what that post was you were referring to
Mm.
on Instagram is I've just found I'm just more and more unashamed in a
Mm.
time that's very unpopular to talk about the things that are distinctive about Christianity.
Mm.
People tend to think, oh, he's one of those evangelicals. And I'm one of those guys that more and more, as much as I can say it, I'm saying, well, yeah, there's things about evangelical Christianity that need to be called out, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm.
Historical, biblical, Orthodox Christianity is not American. it's not our invention in the last 200
Yeah.
years. There are things about it that are that some
Mhm.
of those need to be called into question, and maybe we need to strip ourselves of those
Mm.
things as a people, as a culture. But the basics of it that we've inherited from Jesus himself, from scripture, let's not throw those away because that is still the
Yeah.
same as it always has been, you know.
Mm.
So anyways, I'm one of those people that are I'm just not ashamed to say I'm one of those. I'm trying to follow Jesus and love him, and I read the scriptures and do it and try to do what it says, very imperfectly, but that's the
Yeah.
point of grace, you know.
Mm.
No pun intended.
Yeah. They were a good band in the 90s too.
Yep.
So, man, time has flown by, but I do wanna have you talk about your podcast that you're launching and maybe a quick synopsis of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for about 5 years, I've had this podcast on my mind, and a few people, including my friend Aaron Shust and some others, have been telling me, "Dude, you've got to do this podcast."
Mm.
So we ended up landing on the title of it is the Eternal Music Podcast, and you can learn more about it at theeternalmusic.com.
Cool.
There's a space on there where it shows a little preview. It's got the trailer on there and a little bit of info,
Nice.
and then you can also sign up if you're interested in learning more about it or finding out when it launches, which is going to be in the next few months. You can sign up there, and then you'll get an email when it's on, Apple and Spotify and all these places. But yeah, it's aimed at Christian music makers because one of my visions and dreams is that the next generation of Christian music is the best one that's ever existed.
Mm.
And so best meaning what? Meaning impactful.
Yeah.
And so we're going to definitely look at the past. It's an interview style podcast. So I'm going to have a lot of guests on that have been involved in Christian music since the beginning,
Yeah.
both, big names, but also folks from behind the scenes. But one of the things I really want to dive into is what's the future of Christian music?
Mm.
And it's kind of fun to dream a little bit because I imagine the reason we called it the Eternal Music Podcast is because God and his kingdom and his music will last forever. And
Mm.
so therefore his music will last forever. And so if we think about it like that, it calls us up as Christian music makers to a little
Yeah.
bit of a higher standard than just, make the Christian version of so and
Mm.
so or make the Christian version of this genre. It's like,
Yeah.
no, we actually can make something that's more impactful and sacred than we can even imagine, you know? Um,
Mm.
so man, I'd love to have you on it if you're open.
Oh, yeah, of course. I feel like, this name can be its own, like, industry, Christian music industry, and then there's the eternal music industry.
Oh
But I
man.
love that. Yeah, I love, your vision for it, and I think, there needs to be more people talking about this and, different perspectives and thoughts on it. I think there's been a few voices out there
Hmm.
that are talking about these topics. What is Christian music? What is Christian music industry? Um, but I think the more perspectives we have, and like the more diverse the voices are, I think the better, hopefully, like we can make the industry and also like have
Hmm.
it be more kingdom minded and more, I guess, inclusive of the body of Christ. So
Absolutely. Which is something you and I, I'm grateful that you and I get to be involved in all the time because as
yeah.
much as I think Christian music is thought of as those major label, big tours, K Love and Air One kind of thing.
Mm.
And that is a segment of it for sure. But you and I have a front seat in a lot of ways to the next
Yeah.
generation of Christian music because things are becoming more and more and more indie. So to me, one of the exciting things about the conversations in the Eternal Music podcast is we get to explore what does that mean? Like
Mm.
as you said, as more people are independent, it also means more creative power, more flexibility,
Mm.
but how do we
Yeah.
do that well in a way that shakes and impacts culture and the globe?
Yeah.
So I've got some
Mm.
friends. In fact, just right before I got on with you, I was talking to a friend who is a musicianary. I would call him a musicianary,
Oh, yeah.
very high level music maker.
Mm.
Him and his family actually all do this together. They tour together all over the world. and
Mm,
they draw thousands upon thousands, like crowds of thousands in other countries where
mm,
it, without giving too much away, they're not even supposed to be there sometimes, and
mm,
they share the message of Jesus with people through music in a way that most people here in America that think about doing Christian music can't even fathom. Um, and so just to be able to have a guy like him share his heart and share his story to folks,
yeah.
someone just from some little town in the middle of nowhere somewhere who in their heart has this dream to
Mm,
serve the kingdom through music, I would love for that to set a fire, in the heart of
yeah.
someone who's going to make major
Mm,
moves and major changes in lives in the future.
yeah.
So
It's awesome.
anyways, I'm excited. Thanks
Yeah.
for asking about that.
Yeah, for sure. And how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in, maybe next steps and working with you?
Yeah, I would love to talk to folks about any production needs or, put them in touch with someone if I'm not the right fit, because I know a lot of folks in that world. So you can find me at samhartmusic.com, and Hart is Hart. So samhartmusic.com, Instagram /samhartmusic. Same with Facebook and Twitter. I'm on there as well. And then, like I said, the podcast, if you're interested in that, you can get there from my website, but then you can also get there from theeternalmusic.com.
Sweet. And I'm going to do a quick plug because we talked about, independent artists not having to like give up ownership and creative control. We actually started something. We started a label last year called Lula Street Records. And under that umbrella, we also started, and it's a totally different model than the traditional model.
Hmm.
And you can find out more like on our website and stuff. But under that is basically label services, which is Path Music Collective. So if you want to check it out, it's pathmusiccollective.com, and we offer label services, and it's basically a win-win scenario where you get the big label support, but you're not giving up any ownership
Beautiful.
or creative control of your music. So
Yeah.
I
And
really feel like that's important.
I will say too that you and I have worked with a lot of the same people over the last
Yeah.
few years, and dude, I'm such a fan of you from afar too, and just from hearing the experience that artists have with you and your team.
Oh,
So
that's
thank
awesome.
you for all that you bring to, I guess I could say our community, but our industry and all of that.
Yeah.
I hear great things about you, dude. So keep it up.
Thanks. That's encouraging. Yeah, Sam, thanks so much for being on the podcast. And yeah, we look forward to just seeing what God does with your production and your podcast and all that, all the other things that we'll be hearing about on your social media.
Man, thanks. Such an honor. Seriously. Thank you for the invite, bro. Always a great hang.
Yeah.